Hi, I'm Jonathan Hassell, Director of Hassell Inclusion and lead author of British Standard BS 8878 on web accessibility. Unlike other accessibility standards, BS 8878 is a non-technical standard that gives organizations a framework for integrating accessibility into their policies and business-as-usual processes. At CSUN in San Diego this year, I'll be presenting case studies of how implementing BS 8878 has provided many benefits for a number of different organizations in the UK. One of the things I'm interested in at the moment is to see whether or not the guidance in BS 8878 might be useful for organizations outside the UK, and whether or not it will be useful to consider transforming it into an international standard. So I was fascinated when I came across this book, Strategic IT Accessibility, Enabling the Organization, by Jeff Kline, in which he summarizes his experience of embedding accessibility into the culture of IBM in the States and globally. And I'm delighted to bring you an interview with him today, where we discuss his book, his thoughts on how it relates to BS 8878, and possible directions for bringing the two together in the future. So hi Jeff, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, Jonathan. How are you?
That's great. I'm good, thank you. Really delighted to have this opportunity to catch you on film because you can't make it to CSUN. So I'm hoping to take some of this footage there, and obviously there'll be the full thing on my website. Some questions for you. And probably just the best one to introduce you is to ask you what made you write the book?
Well, what happened is I'd left IBM. I was looking around for my next career opportunity and looking at a number of different things, and was talking with several accessibility consultants about this whole idea of business transformation. And the reception I was getting wasn't all that great. You know, people didn't really know what to do with it. You know, everybody was kind of heads down focused on remediating websites and things, and that was really the core of their services. So in speaking with one of the consultants, she said to me, well, you know, it might be interesting. Why don't you develop an outline, and then maybe we can collaborate on a white paper? And I said, well, okay. So I sat down and I did started writing the outline, and I finished the outline, and it was 2.5 pages long, and I realized that it wasn't an outline for a white paper, it was an outline for a book. And so I just kind of set off and started writing the book.
And that book was based on the experience that you had at IBM?
Correct. Mostly the experience I had at IBM, I managed the compliance and consulting section of the Accessibility Center. And so I was exposed to many different areas of IBM, both the external facing things, the internal hardware, software services, and all the different, other aspects of it. And so I came to the realization that I had some knowledge that very few people in the world probably have working in such a complex environment with regard to accessibility transformation. And then, when I joined the state in Health and Human Services, I started gaining some more knowledge in the public sector, and I started to integrate some of that into the book as well.
And the state that you're talking about is
Texas.
So that's where you are now. So you have all of this this experience. You've created this outline for a book. Did you have a clear idea what the purpose of the book would be?
The purpose is to really help people that really start to get accessibility and realize the importance of it, but they don't really necessarily know where to start or what to do. Like I say, most people are still focused on the tactical aspect of remediating websites and not much else, and working on what I call the technical enablement. So what this book does is create kind of an understanding of and provide some tools and techniques for developing an accessibility program within an organization of any size, and all the different areas that it could impact and the kinds of things that you might need to consider in each one of those areas with respect to accessibility, starting from policy and governance for the entire organization, and then drilling down into the different areas where accessibility plays a role.
So you start off in that big wide level, and then sort of narrowing down. I mean, from reading your book, one of the things that I was really impressed was that there was a lot of insight into the way businesses works, and if you like, some of the pitfalls, some of the minefields that you might have to navigate to not only establish an accessibility function within an organization, but actually maintain that, over time. That was, as I say, for me, one of the real eye openers in your book, and I was just interested in how people in the rest of the accessibility community in the US and beyond, how have they responded to your book? What's the reception been?
Oh, I've gotten very positive response from a lot of the folks in the industry that actually have excuse me, a lot of knowledge of accessibility, but have started to focus on this. A lot of consultants are doing some policy work here and there, but obviously the book goes far beyond policy. And so a lot of the industry experts have read it and really thought it was very useful. I've got quotes on the rear cover and on the front cover from some of the experts. And then, I get emails all the time from people that say, I've received your book and I'm going through it and I'm sharing it with my whole organization, and we're trying to get more copies of it because, this is really an important thing. So, I think people, when they just realize that this is a holistic kind of a problem that they have to deal with, the light bulb goes off. And I don't get too deep into any particular area because every organization has their own processes and their own things. But so what I try to do is try to make sure that I'm touching on all the different elements that I think need to be considered, and then they can go work on the various aspects of it themselves.
That's great. And I understand that the book is being handed out as part of a course at CSUN. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, Sharon Rush from Nobility Inc. She has a module on Access University that they do every year at CSUN. And for the people that enroll, I think, and I think she's got an administrative track and a technical track. And those who enroll in the technical track, the administrative track, will receive a free copy of the book.
So even though you can't be at CSUN, your book is there, which is great. If I can move us on to some of the things that we've been talking about recently, you and I, around the links between your book and your experience and my experience here in the UK, which has resulted in British Standard 8878. I'm interested in what you think about the standard.
I think that the 8878 and my book, I think, ultimately are trying to accomplish the same thing. It's going beyond the technical aspects of accessibility and developing plans and processes to integrate accessibility into the fabric of an organization in a lot of different ways. Aside from some of the terminology that I think is a little bit different, and it's really we're trying to accomplish both documents are trying to accomplish the same thing, where you might 8878 is something that you could read and go through, and then my book I think really supports that both on the front end, looking at things like business case and organization and things like that, and then 8878 has a lot more of the technical guidance and things like that. So I think they both kind of dovetail with each other.
That was my feeling too when I read your book. There were so many things that we thought, we don't want to go into detail on that particular point because we want to make a standard, and a standard should be short and brief and quite not technical, but quite precise, and if you like, doesn't allow for that, for examples and narrative. It feels like your book, in a lot of ways, is filled in a lot of the gaps that, if you like, we placed in 8878 for some really good examples, experience, detail beyond what we were doing. Uh, there are obviously always going to be some sort of similarities and differences between two works. Obviously, we created ours in the UK, and it has a little bit of a UK sensibility to it, because the laws in the UK are quite specific and slightly different from the laws in the US. Obviously, we also asked a lot of people to comment on what we were doing. Had I have known about you at the time, you would have been top of that list. But I'm interested in, we've both been doing a kind of, if you like, a similar work on different sides of the Atlantic. So what you see as the similarities and the differences there?
Well, the similarity is, I think both countries are pretty serious about, resolving the problem. I think that in most countries in general, including the UK, it's been a little bit challenging to move beyond the web. And in the US, Section 508 includes lots of other hardware and software and standalone devices and many different things. And of course, that's going to be expanded more in the new 508. So, trying to reach beyond that and get people to think about things beyond, beyond just the web, I think is something that is where there's a bit of divergence between the U.S. and other countries.
I think I would agree with that. I think certainly from my perspective, having looked and examined sort of our perspectives kind of closely, is we're certainly the team behind me helping to write 8878 seem to be very keen on, if you like, thinking about accessibility from a usability perspective. I think pretty much everyone on the team was very aware that accessibility, even when done well, might not necessarily result in products that could help and be used by disabled people. And based on the law in the UK that actually requires disabled people being able to use things rather than just, if you like, technically access them. That was where we kind of pushed things. So if you like, we were trying to bring together usability and accessibility almost into one thing around inclusive design. It was kind of interesting from your book that it felt that it was slightly more on the technical side and slightly more on the angle of things, which seems to be around VPATs and things like that. Does that ring bells with you?
Yeah, a little bit. I've used usability, and I spent a lot of time in usability. I managed several teams in usability at IBM, and of course, products have to be usable for everyone. But I think what needs to be done is you integrate accessibility into your usability processes, practices, and principles, which means at the very beginning of a project, when you're starting a development project, you integrate usability requirements for people with disabilities, and then you do that all the way through every phase of your so once you have it in the requirements, now you can design and develop for it, and then at the end you validate. And if it's possible to test with people with disabilities, then that's what you should do. Unfortunately, that's not always easy to find test subjects especially when you start developing things that are a little bit more complex and require a level of knowledge. It's not just a self-service, public portal kinds of things. So I view usability for people with disabilities as just a piece of usability. You just have to include that population, and it does take a little bit more time and effort. But what was interesting at IBM, it was the usability teams and the user interface teams and usability folks that were designing those UIs who were kind of charged with this whole accessibility mission in many parts of IBM. And it's interesting because it was really a technical set of criteria to integrate, but somehow it was the usability people that were the most involved in a lot of the areas. And so they were responsible for driving those requirements and trying to get people with disabilities in as as test subjects and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that certainly in my experience is it feels like, I mean, certainly at the BBC, accessibility started out as something that was a technical thing that our coders needed to do. Then over time, it became more of a user experience, usability thing to do, rather like you were saying at IBM. Towards the end of my time at the BBC, I was trying to push things towards a product management ownership of accessibility because, from my perspective, a lot of the decisions about what functionality could be included, what timescales were important for the project. So if you needed to get it out by a particular date, could you afford to spend the time on those sort of accessibility concerns? If you like, a lot of the drive needed to be coming from the product management side of things. And I think both of our documents are pretty good at actually saying there's a huge variety of stakeholders who need to be on side, who need to understand accessibility and how it impacts their jobs. I'm interested in, so do you think in the future, if you like, the key stakeholders are going to continue to be the usability people, or was that changing at IBM and where you are in Texas too?
The whole thing is that it has to be, and I think both of our 8878 in my book talk about this. It has to be integrated into the way that you do business on a regular basis. So it has to be integral to the process. You have to be very careful in trade-offs when you're developing a product because, as most people know, on a big project, there's things that are going in and out of the plan all the time, and budget dynamics. And so, maintaining and preserving the accessibility requirements, there has to be somebody to kind of, stand up and champion that within the organization. Say, no, you can't take those out of there. So, baking it into the process, so it just becomes part of, the way that you develop, hardware and software, is really the key. And I always look at this, and it was one of the questions I asked when I took my IBM assignment in that area. How long is this mission going to last? Because the object really is, if you do your job well, hopefully you work your way out of a job. And the number that was given to me, of course, was that was 5 or 6 years past, and of course everything is still going. But so having those executive champions at the top level of the organization is key, because it's very difficult in some cases to sell it on the classic question that comes up, well, how many more products are we going to sell if we put in these accessibility features? And while that does fly with some kinds of features in a product, in this one it doesn't.
Again, it was one of the things that that I loved about your book. There's one specific page where you summarize elements of a business case to, if you like, convert maybe the board of an organization, if you like, to create those champions. Can you talk a little bit about that business case and how you feel that, if you like, you can start this process with companies and you can interest them in in why they should go on this journey, because as you said, it's quite a long journey and it's quite an involved journey. So why should they bother?
Well, there's a number of reasons. I kind of separate my the rationale into both mitigating risk and then business advantage, and I provide examples of both of those, both in in the chapters themselves, and I have a few scenarios in the book that are somewhat hypothetical, but really kind of drive the point home as to what's happening. So, I have those, and then when you start to look at one of the business case things that I think is becoming more and more compelling is when you look at the maturing population and the amount of financial capital that those individuals represent. It's quite astounding, and so it's in if you're in business, it certainly behooves you to make sure that you address that percentage of the population in a way that will allow them access to the information that they need, in their later years. And I think that starts to become more of the real business case. And the other one is, there's a number of things, right? There's, the ability to employ people, the loyalty and the kind of performance that individuals with disabilities can provide to an organization. I mean, it's really a diversity issue, but it's at the same time, it's a diversity issue that's unique because people with disabilities have a dependency on technology that none of the other diversity groups have. So you have to be able to enable everything to do that.
Yeah. I'd say one of the things that I love as well is that my experience of taking the needs of disabled people, which can be quite different on occasions to the needs of other people, into a process where people are coming up with ideas. Real innovation can come out of thinking about those sorts of things. The typewriter, only really exists because somebody had a wife, if I recall rightly, who was blind, and it was how was she going to communicate? So, if you like, sometimes making sure that we pull in that wide, spectrum of needs results in some quite amazing sort of innovations, which can take organizations out from those first sort of like 7 ideas that every organization has, and maybe pushes them into places which are a bit more innovative, and some unique selling points arrive which they didn't feel were available. So just sort of looking at where your book and where BS 8878 can maybe go in the future. I guess just the first question. I mean, do you think that 8878 is applicable in the US? Would it be helpful if for people in the US to be more aware of it and to be looking at it?
Yeah, I think of whether it's used in its entirety or whether it's used as aspects of it. It does start to talk about process and integration and a lot of the things that that we've been discussing that are really key to it. And so that's kind of over time, I think that consideration needs to be maybe the stuff needs to come out of 8878 and into the other standards with regard to accessibility or even other business processes. One of the things that I do comment on my book is the things that fall kind of outside of the mainstream processes and procedures and things that everybody is using decreases the likelihood of their adoption. And so the more that you get integrated into the things that everybody is using, and they just go to that one place and have everything that they need to follow, I think the better off it is.
I would agree. It's one of the interesting things around the where we're at, I think, in accessibility at the moment. Are you aware of the workshop that's happening just before CSUN about this idea of maybe an international organization of accessibility professionals?
Yeah, I heard about that.
So, I mean, one of the interesting things from that perspective is that they're looking to maybe codify what makes a good accessibility professional, but also what are the important things for accessibility professionals, if you like, to have in their armory. And I'm going to those sessions, and if you like, my main contribution is to make sure that, if you like, the organizational, the process, the strategic aspects of accessibility, which I think we both completely agree on, are not forgotten in that kind of professionalizing of the accessibility community. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've shared some ideas on that. When you talk about an accessibility certification as an accessibility professional, I think that my opinion is that it needs to have some granularity with regard to, okay, I'm a Java accessibility professional. It's really kind of not really practical to assume that somebody is going to be an accessibility expert across all the different technologies that are available now and in the future, because most programmers and technical folks are deep in one or two or maybe three things, but to be able to collect them all starts to get a little bit more problematic. So having these kind of compartments for the technical side, but at the same time, there's this other aspect of it, right? There's this leadership and the business elements of it, which are really, I would say, that are almost as important as the actual technical enablement itself. So how do you organize? How do you build policy? How do you institute governance? How do you integrate into the key processes and track and measure? So that part of it, I think, becomes even a more important element in some ways, and then the technical. And the thing to keep in mind is when you're introducing accessibility into an organization in this more grand scale, that individual that's doing that, they're just not going to have time to go in there and debug code and fix code. I mean, there are bigger problems that have to be solved. And so, it's really important for people to be aware of that and have some ways to approach and go at it, and be able to delegate some of those other things to the technical folks. Make sure that there are training programs in place as well. So it's got to be long drawn out response, but I think it's got to have a balance of both of those things.
I would agree completely. And maybe just one last thing. When we shared BS 8878 with the international community of people who create accessibility standards, so people from W3C and from ISO, from all over the world, earlier on, sort of like last year, there was a real call for people to say, you know what, this is really needed, because we do not have international standards around those strategic process aspects of accessibility. And certainly there was call at the time for the standard to be made into an international standard. I think one of the great things about the international standard setting process is that you can't do that quickly. It takes a while, and one of the reasons. Yeah, absolutely. Any standards process does. But if you like, one of the great things that's maybe happened in the year since last February is that it's become clear that there are aspects of 8878 which maybe need a little bit of clarification. There are things that it could learn from people like yourself, and that it needs to be considered in terms of, if you like, which organization might take a process standard, forwards. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we can combine elements of 8878 and your experience that's there in your book? Are there other places that we can get experience to actually try and create an international standard?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think ISO has international standards on a number of things. Um, you know, and probably take a little heat for this, but back in the day there was ISO 9000, and everybody was scrambling around, which is basically a process for processes. You don't hear much about it anymore. I know that they still have auditors come around and recertify and things like that, but so I don't know how seriously it continues to be taken. But if there are standards for operating a business that develops products, then clearly making sure that the audience for accessibility and inclusiveness is somehow integrated into those. But then again, if none of those things are really being have a lot of visibility, it could be that you know that a standalone standard for accessibility, based on something like the book and 8878, might be the direction to go.
Sure. It'll be interesting to see. As I say, I think we're both of the opinion that that standards are good if the standard is good and it's applied. I know one of the things we've been discussing is kind of compliance and whether or not people actually do are incentivized in some way, whether by sort of regulations or laws or some other sort of mechanism to actually kind of follow best practice standards. And I think it will be interesting to see where all of this comes out. But I've been delighted to make this relationship. I think it's really helpful. I'm really sort of frustrated in some ways that we can't just sit down over a beer at CSUN and sort of like take all of these things further. I think maybe that for later in the year. But it's been brilliant for me to be able to capture some of your thoughts now, so that I can take those to CSUN with me next week. And make sure that that it's, if you like, not just this little process standard from the UK that's coming over, but actually there's insights on it which come from the US as well. So thanks very much for your time this afternoon, Jeff. That's been really great, and let's hope that some great things come out of CSUN. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, Jonathan. Thank you.